This story is titled, My Wife's Daughter Told Me to Stop Thinking About It While Dating the Loser Who Bullied My Son at Our Family Dinner. So I declared her boyfriend should pay for her university instead of me. Now everyone calls me the bad guy. Hey everyone, my name is David Rodriguez, and I'm 29 years old. From the outside looking in, I'm living what most people would call the absolute dream. I've got everything that most guys spend their entire lives fantasizing about, and my life appears perfect to anyone who doesn't know the whole story. But let me tell you exactly how this whole mess started. Because the foundation of success often comes from the darkest places you can imagine. Growing up in Millfield, Kentucky was exactly as exciting as it sounds, which is to say it wasn't exciting at all. Picture a place where rusted-out pickup trucks sit permanently in front yards like lawn ornaments, where neighbors genuinely believed that screaming matches at 2 in the morning were prime entertainment for the whole block. Our landlord was the kind of guy who thought broken faucets could be fixed with duct tape and hope, and somehow this passed for professional property management. When I was 9 years old, my dad left for beer one Wednesday evening and apparently got so lost that it took him the next 2 decades to find his way back home. My mom worked double shifts at Target during the day, then cleaned medical offices at night when most people were sleeping. During tax season, she'd add a third job doing tax preparation just to keep our electricity turned on and food on the table. Our apartment had walls that were thinner than tissue paper, which meant I heard every single conversation about unpaid bills, every phone call from collection agencies demanding money we didn't have, and every night when Mom cried herself to sleep thinking I couldn't hear her through those paper-thin walls. That kind of thing burns into your memory forever and shapes everything you do afterward. High school counselors kept shoving college brochures at me like I was going to magically find $50,000 lying around somewhere in our poverty-stricken household. Instead of wasting time on impossible dreams, I walked into the Army recruiting office the day after graduation, wearing my only decent button-down shirt and boots that were held together with more tape than actual leather. The recruiter took one look at me and knew immediately that he had a winner on his hands. I did 3 tours in Iraq between 2005 and 2009. And I won't bore you with detailed war stories that nobody really wants to hear anyway. But let's just say that I learned some very specific skills about logistics, problem solving, and what happens when you mess with people I care about. I came back with a purple heart, some nasty scars that tell stories I don't share at dinner parties, and enough GI Bill benefits to actually make college happen for someone like me. I used every single penny of that GI Bill benefit studying aviation management at the University of Florida, determined to turn my military experience into something profitable. During those college years, I lived in what could generously be described as a glorified storage closet, worked at UPS loading trucks on weekends to make ends meet, and survived primarily on instant noodles and whatever leftover pizza I could scavenge from campus events. Despite the harsh living conditions, I managed to graduate completely debt-free in May 2010. Which turned out to be perfect timing to watch the entire economy collapse like a house of cards around everyone else. While everyone else was crying about the recession and lamenting their terrible luck, I saw nothing but opportunity everywhere I looked. I started Rodriguez Aviation Services with one beat-up Cessna that had seen better decades and a cell phone that barely held a charge. My business model was simple: doing cargo runs for whoever would pay cash, no questions asked. I worked 18-hour days followed by 4 hours of sleep, then repeated the cycle endlessly. There was no social life, no hobbies, no relaxation time, just pure grinding until something better came along to change my circumstances. That something better turned out to be a Department of Defense contract in 2012 for moving military equipment between bases across the southeastern United States. Government work meant steady payments that actually arrived on time, and steady payments meant I could afford to buy more aircraft and expand my operations. More aircraft meant I could bid on bigger contracts, which meant I could finally hire actual employees instead of doing absolutely everything myself from dawn until midnight. Fast forward to 2017, and Rodriguez Aviation Logistics was handling cargo contracts for defense contractors, pharmaceutical companies, and energy giants across multiple states. We weren't just moving boxes anymore like some glorified delivery service. Instead, we were coordinating complex supply chains worth millions of dollars, handling materials that required special clearances and handling procedures. Think FedEx, but for stuff that either explodes or costs more than most people's houses, and you'll understand the level we were operating at. My wife Monica manages investment portfolios for wealthy clients who trust her with their retirement funds and generational wealth. Between her financial wizardry and my aviation empire, we're doing very well for ourselves financially. We bought a house in Bayshore Estates, which is one of those gated communities where the homeowners association has actual rules about what colors you're allowed to paint your mailbox and specific times when you're permitted to cut your grass without facing fines. But here's the thing about clawing your way up from absolutely nothing. You never really forget what feeling powerless is like, no matter how much success you achieve. Every accomplishment feels temporary, like it could disappear tomorrow. Every setback feels deeply personal, like the universe is specifically targeting you. You develop this almost paranoid need to protect what you've built, spending your entire life bracing for someone to take it all away from you. So when you finally get something good in your life, you hold on like hell and refuse to let anyone threaten it. When my son Tyler was born in 2012, I thought I had life completely figured out and under control. The kid arrived after 20 hours of labor that had Monica threatening to murder me in increasingly creative ways, which I'm told is standard procedure for first-time fathers. I did all the typical dad stuff, counting fingers and toes, making sure everything was where it should be, taking those blurry photos that somehow seem incredibly important in the moment. Except everything wasn't actually where it should be, and our lives were about to get significantly more complicated. Tyler came out with bilateral cleft lip and palate, which basically means his upper lip and the roof of his mouth didn't form properly during development. Picture a gap running from his nostril down through his lip, plus an opening in the roof of his mouth that connected directly to his nasal cavity. It looked more dramatic than it actually was medically, but it meant our future would involve a lot of hospitals and surgical procedures. The next 12 years involved 8 major surgeries to reconstruct his lip, close the palate, and rebuild the bone structure in his face. Each surgery meant weeks of recovery, time where Tyler couldn't eat solid foods, months of intensive speech therapy to learn how to speak properly with his reconstructed mouth, and watching your kid adapt to a world that stares at anyone who looks different from what people consider normal. Tyler handled everything like an absolute champion, developing the kind of resilience that most adults never achieve. This kid taught himself Java programming before he could ride a bike without training wheels, built his first gaming computer at age 11 using nothing but YouTube tutorials and sheer determination, and turned out to be smart as hell with a dark sense of humor that kids develop when they've been through real hardship. Generally, he gave zero damns about looking different from other kids and seemed confident in his own skin. The facial scarring isn't particularly dramatic to look at now. It's mostly just some asymmetry around his upper lip and a slight difference in how his nose sits on his face. His speech has improved dramatically over the years through all that therapy, though certain sounds still come out slightly different than they would for other kids. Most people wouldn't even notice unless they were specifically looking for it. Tyler cruised through elementary school without any major issues that we could see. His teachers loved working with him because he was bright and eager to learn. He had a solid group of friends who were into the same nerdy stuff he enjoyed: programming, building computers, playing complex strategy games that required actual thinking. Generally, life was good, and we thought we'd navigated the worst of his challenges successfully. Then 8th grade happened, and he met Blake Henderson, which changed everything about our family's trajectory. Blake wasn't your standard mouth-breathing bully who solved problems with his fists and basic intimidation tactics. This kid came from the kind of serious money that thinks rules are more like polite suggestions that don't really apply to them. His dad, Robert, owns Henderson Properties, which controls about half the commercial real estate in our entire county: shopping centers, office buildings, medical complexes, the works. His mom, Patricia, is a partner at Morrison Henderson and Associates, one of those white shoe law firms that charges $800 an hour just to tell you why you can't sue them for anything. The targeting of Tyler started immediately when school began in September, and it was sophisticated in a way that made my blood run cold. Blake made a deliberate game out of mimicking Tyler's speech patterns in crowded hallways where maximum people could witness the humiliation. He'd make exaggerated facial expressions while talking directly to Tyler, pretending to be friendly and helpful while actually mocking his appearance in front of other students. But Blake's real genius was staying just under the radar of any school disciplinary action. He never quite crossed the line into anything teachers could definitively prove was bullying, and he always had perfect plausible deniability when confronted by adults. "I was just talking to him," he'd say with that innocent expression that fooled every authority figure. The digital harassment was even more sophisticated and calculated than the face-to-face stuff. Blake created multiple fake accounts on Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok using Tyler's photos and personal information he'd gathered from various sources. He posted close-up photos of Tyler's face with garbage captions like genetic freak and failed surgery, turning my son's medical condition into viral content for entertainment. Blake recruited other kids to participate in the harassment by making it seem like harmless fun rather than systematic destruction of another human being. Hey, ask Tyler to say, "Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers and film it," he'd suggest to other students. The speech sounds that gave Tyler trouble became viral content for kids who thought psychological harassment was just another form of entertainment. Tyler tried hiding all of this from us initially, which is exactly what predators count on from their victims. He started avoiding speaking up in class, where he'd always been an active participant. He quit the robotics club, where he'd been the star performer, and was genuinely excited about the projects. He stopped going to any social events or after-school activities, using homework as an excuse. These are classic isolation tactics that predators use to systematically break down their victims' support systems and make them feel completely alone. I noticed the behavioral changes, but figured it was probably normal teenage adjustment stuff. Kids getting used to middle school dynamics, dealing with hormones, whatever. Monica was more concerned than I was initially. She'd catch Tyler staring at himself in mirrors for long periods, asking questions about fixing his appearance that he'd never worried about before in his entire life. The real red flag that something was seriously wrong was when Tyler stopped coding and working on computer projects. This kid had lived and breathed programming since he was old enough to use a keyboard, spending hours doing that stuff purely for fun. Suddenly, his computer was collecting dust while he spent entire weekends in his room with the curtains closed like he was trying to disappear from the world. When we tried talking to Tyler about what was going on, he just said that middle school was different from elementary school, and he was figuring things out on his own. He didn't want to worry us with typical teenage drama, and he didn't want to admit that some rich kid was systematically destroying his self-confidence purely for entertainment. Looking back, I can see all the warning signs we missed, but at the time, it seemed like normal adolescent adjustment issues. But I wasn't completely blind to what was happening around my son. The first time I caught wind of the harassment was during Tyler's first semester when I picked him up early for an orthodontist appointment. Walking through the hallway toward his locker, I heard some kid making exaggerated speech sounds behind us, the kind of mocking that every parent learns to recognize instinctively. I turned around and found Blake with two of his buddies, all three of them mimicking Tyler's pronunciation while laughing like it was the funniest thing they'd ever witnessed. Blake had the sheer audacity to smile and wave at me when he saw me looking, like we were all sharing some innocent joke together. I walked straight up to him without hesitation, got down to his eye level, and used my command voice from the army. The tone that made grown soldiers stop whatever they were doing and pay attention. "You got something to say. You say it to me directly right now," I told him while maintaining eye contact. Blake went from cocky teenager to scared little boy in about half a second, immediately starting to stammer about how they were just playing around and didn't mean anything serious by it. His friends scattered like roaches when you suddenly turn on the lights, leaving Blake to face the consequences alone. "Playing around ends right now," I informed him firmly. The kid nodded frantically and seemed genuinely frightened. I thought that would be the end of the harassment, but I was completely wrong about how determined this predator actually was. The breaking point came in December during what I now refer to as the incident. But before we get to that nightmare, you need to understand that Blake wasn't acting alone anymore. He'd successfully recruited a whole crew of kids who thought destroying Tyler was some kind of entertaining group project. Tyler's grades started slipping for the first time in his entire academic life, which was completely out of character for him. Teachers reported that he seemed distracted and withdrawn during classes, but couldn't pinpoint exactly why his behavior had changed so dramatically. The guidance counselors actually suggested that maybe Tyler needed social skills training to help him fit in better with his peers, which showed how completely they'd missed what was really happening. December 18th, 2019. That date is burned into my memory like a brand, because that's the day Blake crossed the line from psychological terrorism into something that would have impressed Navy SEALs with its calculated cruelty. I was in the middle of an important client meeting discussing a cargo contract for military drone components when my phone started buzzing insistently. The first call from Westfield Middle School went to voicemail because I was presenting financial projections. The second call I answered immediately, and Principal Thompson's voice had that careful, measured tone that every parent dreads hearing. "Mr. Rodriguez, we need you to come collect Tyler immediately." There's been a situation that requires immediate attention and medical evaluation. I left that meeting so fast I probably broke the sound barrier, abandoning a potential $1 million contract without a second thought. I drove the 15 miles to school in about 10 minutes, taking turns at speeds that would have impressed Formula One drivers. When I arrived, I found Tyler in the nurse's office, and the kid looked like he had gone 12 rounds with Floyd Mayweather and lost every single one. The physical injuries were immediately obvious. He had a black eye that was already swelling shut, a split lip that was still bleeding, and his clothes were torn beyond repair. What used to be his favorite sweatshirt was now just shredded fabric hanging off his shoulders. Here's what happened during lunch period behind the gymnasium, away from security cameras and adult supervision. Blake and 4 of his crew members had been planning this attack for weeks, coordinating every detail like a military operation. Blake approached Tyler like he wanted to discuss a class project, using that as bait to get Tyler alone and away from other students who might have intervened. Once Tyler was isolated in the area behind the building, the rest of Blake's crew jumped in to execute their plan. They zip-tied Tyler's arms behind his back and propped him against the brick wall, then began filming everything that happened next with their smartphones. Imagine 5 teenage boys with unlimited access to social media and absolutely no conscience whatsoever. That's what my son was facing completely alone. Blake narrated the entire assault like it was some kind of twisted medical documentary, describing Tyler's surgeries and facial differences like he was conducting a freak show exhibit for his online audience. "Look at this ugly mess," Blake said directly to the camera while gesturing at Tyler's face with clinical detachment. This is what happens when trailer park genetics meet modern medicine. Some people just aren't meant to be fixed, no matter how much money you throw at the problem. They took detailed photographs of Tyler's surgical scars from every conceivable angle, discussing his facial differences like they were documentary filmmakers studying birth defects rather than torturing a fellow human being. The whole thing was clinical, detached, and completely dehumanizing in a way that still makes my blood boil. The videos went live on Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok before Tyler even made it to the nurse's office for medical attention. Principal Thompson showed me the footage after Tyler was stable, and watching 5 teenagers systematically torture my son while he begged them to stop was like getting my heart ripped out through my throat. But Blake's face in those videos, the pure satisfaction, the obvious enjoyment, the complete absence of any human empathy, told me we weren't dealing with normal kids making poor decisions. This was something much darker and more dangerous. Tyler's testimony was what really broke me emotionally. Between sobs and panic attacks, he described in heartbreaking detail how Blake had planned every aspect of the assault. The timing to avoid adult supervision, the location away from security cameras, the equipment they brought, even the specific words designed to cause maximum psychological damage. This wasn't a spontaneous act of teenage cruelty. It was a premeditated attack designed to destroy another human being for entertainment. The school's response was predictably useless in every way that mattered. There were lots of expressions of concern and repeated assurances that we take this very seriously, followed immediately by detailed explanations about why their hands were supposedly tied. Blake's family had already contacted their attorney before the school even finished documenting the incident, and that lawyer was threatening counter-lawsuits if any permanent disciplinary action was taken against his client. "Boys will be boys," Assistant Principal Davis actually said during our emergency meeting, as if systematic torture was just normal childhood behavior. We can't destroy young men's futures over teenage drama that got slightly out of hand. That's when I demanded a face-to-face meeting with Blake's parents, figuring that maybe they didn't understand the severity of what their son had done to mine. Maybe they'd be horrified when they saw the evidence and would take appropriate action to make things right and ensure this never happened again. My biggest mistake was thinking that Robert and Patricia Henderson were reasonable human beings who would show basic decency when confronted with their son's criminal behavior. The meeting with Blake's parents happened 3 days later in Principal Thompson's office, and it went exactly how you'd expect when entitled rich people are told their precious angel did something wrong. Robert and Patricia showed up dressed like they were attending a corporate board meeting rather than discussing their son's assault on another child. The conversation started with Principal Thompson explaining the incident using carefully neutral language designed to avoid potential lawsuits rather than accurately describing what had actually occurred. He presented the videos, photographs, witness statements, and medical documentation of Tyler's injuries, laying everything out like evidence in a criminal trial. The proof was overwhelming and undeniable. Their son had orchestrated and executed a deliberate assault on a disabled child, filmed it for social media entertainment, and shown absolutely no remorse afterward. Robert's immediate response was the classic boys will be boys deflection. Blake is a high achiever under tremendous pressure to succeed academically and socially. Sometimes that stress manifests in unfortunate ways that don't reflect his true character. Patricia went even further with her victim-blaming approach. Frankly, if Tyler can't handle normal teenage interactions about his appearance, maybe he belongs in special education classes with other special needs children where he'd be more comfortable. That's when Robert made his fatal mistake. He looked directly at me with that smug expression that rich people perfect when dealing with peasants, and said, "Look, we're sorry your son has facial issues, but you can't expect other children to pretend everything's normal when it clearly isn't. Maybe if you'd gotten him proper speech therapy instead of coddling him about his differences, this situation wouldn't have happened in the first place." I don't remember making the conscious decision to hit him. One second he was smirking at me like I was some peasant who should be grateful for his condescending attention, and the next second he was on the floor with a broken nose while I was being restrained by security guards. It was totally worth the assault charge, even though my lawyer had to work overtime getting it reduced to community service and anger management classes. Sometimes violence isn't the answer to your problems, but sometimes it's the only language these people understand. They pressed charges against me immediately, of course. Couldn't have some trailer park veteran thinking he could put hands on his betters without facing serious consequences for his actions. They also filed a civil lawsuit claiming emotional distress and medical expenses for Robert's rhinoplasty, because apparently getting punched in the face by someone whose child you just insulted was somehow my fault entirely. The criminal case dragged on for 8 months while Tyler's situation got progressively worse with each passing day. Tyler stopped attending school entirely because he couldn't function around groups of teenagers anymore. He couldn't handle being in crowded hallways or cafeterias where kids might recognize him from the viral videos Blake had created. He started having severe panic attacks at the mere sight of camera phones, which meant he basically couldn't go anywhere that teenagers congregated. He quit eating regularly, surviving on maybe 1 meal a day when we could convince him to leave his room. Most days, he spent holed up in his bedroom with blackout curtains drawn like a vampire avoiding sunlight, refusing to engage with the outside world that had become so hostile to his existence. We tried homeschooling Tyler while simultaneously fighting the school district through lawyers, endless meetings, depositions, and threats of additional lawsuits from both sides. The whole system seemed specifically designed to protect everyone involved except the actual victim who was suffering. Meanwhile, Tyler was disappearing more each day, becoming a ghost of the confident, brilliant kid he used to be before Blake Henderson entered our lives. The suicide note that Monica found 4 months later was hidden deep in Tyler's computer files, buried in folders within folders like he was trying to hide it from himself as much as from us. It was detailed and methodical, even including specific instructions for distributing his belongings afterward, and apologies to family members for the pain his death would cause them. Reading that document was like getting shot directly in the chest, your own child explaining in heartbreaking detail why he genuinely believes the world would be better without him in it, listing all the ways he thinks he's a burden on everyone who loves him. That night, after Monica and I finished crying and holding each other, I made a decision that changed everything about our family's future. Screw the house we'd worked so hard to afford. Screw the job that had taken me years to build. Screw the life we'd established in Kentucky. We were moving immediately, and I was never going to let anyone hurt my kid again for as long as I lived. Within 8 weeks, we'd sold our house at a significant loss just to get out quickly. I transferred my business operations to Georgia, taking a massive financial hit to relocate all our equipment and contracts. We moved to Atlanta where nobody knew us, nobody had seen the videos, and Tyler could start over completely fresh. We found a new house in Buckhead, enrolled Tyler in a new school district that had actual anti-bullying policies with real consequences, and found him a new therapist who specialized in trauma recovery for adolescents. Recovery took almost 3 years of intensive therapy, careful medication adjustments, and slowly rebuilding Tyler's confidence from absolute ground zero. We started with just getting him to leave his room regularly and interact with family members. Progress was measured in tiny increments, eating meals with us, making eye contact during conversations, eventually feeling safe enough to walk around the neighborhood. We progressed to online gaming with friends he met through programming forums, which helped him remember that not all teenagers were predators. Eventually, he felt safe enough to attend North Atlanta High School, where he thrived academically and socially. Tyler is 21 now and has exceeded every expectation we had for his recovery. He earned a full academic scholarship to Emory University for cybersecurity studies, which is one of the most competitive programs in the country. He also runs a small tech consulting business on the side that's already turning a profit and attracting clients who value his expertise. The transformation from that broken kid hiding in his room to this confident young man has been nothing short of miraculous. During this whole recovery process, I'd also been setting aside money for my niece Samantha's college education, figuring that family helps family, and I'd made a promise to my sister Jennifer years earlier. I told her I'd cover Samantha's medical school expenses when the time came, knowing how expensive that education would be. Samantha was genuinely a smart kid with straight A's throughout high school, served as president of student council, and volunteered regularly at the local hospital. She had everything you'd want to see in a future doctor: intelligence, dedication, and apparent compassion for others. Since my business was absolutely booming and we had more money than we actually needed for our daily expenses, I set up a substantial education fund specifically for Samantha's future. I wanted to make sure that financial barriers wouldn't prevent her from achieving her dreams of becoming a physician, especially since she'd worked so hard throughout her academic career. Jennifer made sure that Samantha understood what Tyler had been through during those dark years, though she didn't share the graphic details that would be inappropriate for a teenager to hear. She gave Samantha enough information to know why we'd moved to Georgia and why certain topics were completely off limits during family gatherings. Samantha seemed genuinely sympathetic to Tyler's situation, always asking about his progress during phone calls and family updates. She even sent him encouraging messages when he started his consulting business, which meant a lot to Tyler as he was rebuilding his confidence. So when we decided to visit Kentucky for Independence Day this year, it felt like the right time for our first trip back since the move. It had been 6 full years since we'd left. Tyler was thriving at Emory University, and we figured we'd be surrounded by supportive family members who understood our situation. I thought enough time had passed that we could enjoy a normal family celebration without any drama or complications. July 4th, 2024. 6 years since we'd been back to Kentucky, and I was actually excited about seeing extended family again for the first time in years. Tyler seemed more relaxed than I'd seen him in a long time, talking enthusiastically about showing his cousins his consulting business, and maybe even discussing his college experiences with kids who were heading to universities themselves. We pulled into Jennifer's driveway around 1 o'clock in the afternoon with our car loaded with enough barbecue supplies to feed a small army. I'd brought my competition-grade smoker that I'd spent a fortune on, along with premium brisket from this place in Atlanta that literally makes angels weep when they taste it. We also had enough craft beer to float a battleship, because I was ready to celebrate America and family like a proper patriot. Everything seemed perfect for what should have been a joyful reunion. Tyler was carrying drinks from the car when Samantha came bouncing out of the house like she was auditioning for some reality television show. She had this big, theatrical smile with her arms spread wide, putting on the whole enthusiastic family reunion performance that seemed slightly over the top even for her. "Uncle David, I'm so excited for you to meet my boyfriend," she announced loudly, which should have been my first warning that something was seriously wrong with this situation. That's when she turned and gestured enthusiastically toward the porch, where someone was standing in the shadow behind the screen door, hidden from our view. For a split second, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing as the figure stepped into the sunlight. Then Blake Henderson emerged, wearing a perfectly pressed polo shirt and looking exactly like the predator I remembered, just 6 years older and college-polished. He had the same dead eyes and the same arrogant smirk that had haunted our family's nightmares for years. The recognition was mutual and immediate. There was no confusion, no hesitation, no wondering if this might be some terrible coincidence. But instead of showing any remorse or attempting to apologize for what he'd put our family through, this psychopath actually had the balls to smile even wider. He looked straight at Tyler, then back at me, and said in that same condescending tone I remembered, Well, Tyler Rodriguez, you look exactly the same as you did in middle school. That sound you heard wasn't just glass shattering on concrete. That was 6 years of painstaking progress, therapy, and healing hitting the pavement and exploding into 1,000 pieces. Every bottle Tyler was carrying hit the driveway simultaneously, and the sound of 8 root beer bottles detonating on concrete was like the opening bell for what would become the worst family gathering in recorded history. But Blake didn't look away or seem even slightly uncomfortable about the destruction he was causing. He just kept that predatory smile while staring directly at my son, like he was savoring the moment and enjoying every second of Tyler's obvious distress. Tyler was completely frozen in place, looking like he'd just seen the devil himself materializing in suburban Kentucky. All the progress we'd made through years of therapy, all the confidence building and healing, all the work to help him feel safe in the world again. It just evaporated in seconds flat, like it had never existed at all. You could literally watch him regressing in real time, becoming that terrified 13-year-old boy who'd been tortured for entertainment. "What's the problem?" Samantha asked with genuine confusion, completely oblivious to the obvious tension crackling in the air around us. I looked at my niece. This kid I'd been planning to spend tens of thousands of dollars on for her medical education, and asked her directly, "Samantha, what the hell were you thinking bringing him here to a family gathering?" Blake actually laughed at my question, which told me everything I needed to know about how this encounter was going to go. "Oh, come on, Mr. Rodriguez, we were just kids back then," he said, with that same dismissive attitude that had infuriated me years earlier. "Tyler is a big boy now, aren't you, Tyler?" That's when I knew beyond any doubt that this wasn't some reformed teenager who'd learned from his mistakes and wanted to make amends for his past behavior. This was the exact same predator, just older and more sophisticated about hiding his true nature from adults who might hold him accountable. What happened next was like watching my family reveal their true colors in real time. And let me tell you, those colors were uglier than a rusty pickup truck with mismatched panels scattered across the yard. Samantha didn't apologize or seem even remotely concerned about Tyler's obvious distress and traumatic reaction. Instead, she got defensive about her supposed right to bring whoever she wanted to family events, regardless of the consequences for other people. She started raising her voice about how unfair it was that Tyler couldn't just get over what happened and move on with his life like a normal person. "That was like forever ago," she said, rolling her eyes like Tyler's trauma was some inconvenient, outdated fashion trend that he should have discarded years earlier. People change, and Blake isn't the same person he was in middle school. He's preemed at Georgia Tech now. He volunteers at the hospital regularly, and he's completely different from who he used to be. Jennifer tried playing peacekeeper in this disaster, pulling Samantha aside for damage control while shooting me warning. Looks about keeping things civil for the sake of family harmony. But Samantha wasn't having any of it, and kept escalating her voice about Tyler being overly sensitive and holding grudges over ancient history. Meanwhile, Blake stood there the entire time with that same smug expression plastered across his face, occasionally nodding when Samantha defended his character. He never once attempted to apologize or show any accountability for what he'd done to Tyler. He actually seemed amused by watching my family implode over his presence at our gathering. My wife Monica had heard enough of this insanity. She gathered our kids and headed straight for the car while telling Samantha exactly what she thought of her boyfriend choice and language that would make sailors blush. Tyler followed Monica without saying a single word, moving like he was in a trance. I stayed behind long enough to inform Samantha that if Blake had really changed so much from his middle school days, maybe he could pay for her medical school education too, because I was officially done funding anything related to her future. Then I told Jennifer that bringing that psychopath to a family gathering was either the most thoughtlessly cruel thing she'd ever done or the most deliberately malicious. And I wasn't sure which possibility was worse. Either way, she'd made her choice about whose side she was on, and it clearly wasn't Tyler's. We spent that night at a Marriott near the airport, and we flew home to Atlanta the next morning without speaking to anyone else in the family. But something about Blake's attitude during that encounter was eating at me during the entire flight back home. It wasn't just the complete lack of remorse or basic human decency. It was the arrogance, the confidence, the way he seemed to enjoy causing Tyler pain. This wasn't someone who'd matured and felt genuinely bad about his past behavior and wanted to make things right. So I decided to do some serious digging using resources that most people don't have access to, because I needed to find out what Blake Henderson had really been up to during his college years. Something told me that his predatory behavior hadn't stopped in middle school. It had just evolved and found new targets. I don't move forward on anything important without solid intelligence first. You don't grow a 7-figure aviation firm by making decisions based on guesswork or emotions. You plan meticulously, execute with precision, and systematically dismantle any obstacles in your path. I called my business partner Carlos Martinez during the flight home, while Tyler was sleeping in the seat next to me, still looking completely drained from the traumatic family encounter. Carlos handles security clearances and personnel vetting for our Department of Defense contracts. He's a former NSA analyst who knows exactly how to find information that normal people can't access through simple Google searches or public records. I need everything available on Blake Henderson, age 21, currently enrolled at Georgia Tech, I told him, while keeping my voice low enough not to wake Tyler. I want financial records, academic records, social media activity, police reports, campus incidents. Everything you can dig up on this piece of garbage. The comprehensive report came back 48 hours later via encrypted email. And it was an absolute goldmine of sociopathic behavior that made his middle school activities look like amateur hour compared to his college-level operations. The document contained multiple conduct violations at Georgia Tech that had somehow mysteriously disappeared from his official academic record. The kind of magical erasure that requires serious money and powerful legal connections to accomplish. There were underage consumption citations that got mysteriously dismissed despite clear evidence and witness testimony. Photos from his private social media accounts showed him openly dealing prescription medications at fraternity parties like he was running a sophisticated pharmaceutical operation. We're talking about enough controlled substances to supply half the campus with whatever chemical assistance they needed to get through exams or social situations. But the real treasure trove was buried in his roommate's formal complaint to campus housing from 8 months earlier. A kid named Brandon Walsh had meticulously documented everything before filing his official report, including photographs of Blake's drug supply and detailed records of his financial transactions. According to Brandon's sworn statement, Blake had been running a sophisticated pharmaceutical operation directly out of their shared dorm room for most of the academic year. He was selling Adderall to students who were cramming for exams, Xanax to kids struggling with anxiety disorders, and OxyContin to anyone willing to pay premium prices for serious pain relief. We're talking about substantial quantities here. Enough controlled substances to supply half the campus with whatever chemical assistance they needed. This wasn't some college kid selling a few pills to friends. This was a full-scale criminal enterprise operating under the protection of his family's wealth and legal connections. Brandon had tried confronting Blake about the operation because he was worried about the serious legal consequences they'd both face if campus police discovered what was happening in their room. Blake's response was to threaten Brandon's family with unspecified consequences if he reported anything to authorities. Then, Blake arranged to have Brandon beaten up by some fraternity brothers who owed him money, making it clear that snitching would result in escalating physical retaliation. The financial records that Carlos pulled were even more interesting and damning than the drug operation itself. Blake had cash deposits that didn't remotely match his part-time job income at the campus bookstore, where he was supposedly earning minimum wage for shelving textbooks. We're talking about $18,000 plus in completely unexplained income over just 8 months. That's serious money for any college student, even one from a wealthy family with generous allowances. But here's where the investigation got really disturbing and showed Blake's true character. Carlos had also accessed Blake's private social media accounts through methods I'm not going to describe in detail, for obvious legal reasons. The screenshots of posts from his inner circle showed parties where they deliberately target psychologically vulnerable students for elaborate psychological games and humiliation rituals. There were photographs of kids crying at parties with mocking captions that treated human suffering like entertainment content. One post from 8 months ago literally said, "Some people never learn their place in the social hierarchy," accompanied by photographs that looked suspiciously like they were taken near Tyler's old school in Kentucky. This psychopath had actually driven back to Kentucky specifically to reminisce about his middle school torture campaign, and probably to check if Tyler was still living there. The fact that he'd made that trip showed he was still obsessing over his victims years later. Another post showed Blake and his crew at a Georgia Tech party, surrounding some obviously distressed freshman who was clearly having a panic attack while they filmed him. The caption read, "Teaching social hierarchy to scholarship kids who don't understand their place." It was the exact same predatory behavior he'd used on Tyler, just targeting college students instead of middle schoolers. Same tactics, same cruelty, same complete absence of human empathy. That's when I realized with crystal clarity that Samantha hadn't just brought my son's former bully to our family gathering by accident. She'd brought an active criminal who was still systematically destroying people's lives for entertainment, just with better legal protection and more sophisticated methods than he'd had in middle school. Blake Henderson wasn't reformed. He was simply operating at a higher level with more resources and fewer consequences. The evidence showed a clear pattern of escalating criminal behavior, psychological manipulation, and predatory targeting of vulnerable individuals. This wasn't someone who'd made mistakes as a kid and learned from them. This was a full-blown sociopath who'd refined his techniques and expanded his operations. Time for some real justice. But first, I needed to deal with my family's increasingly unhinged harassment campaign that started almost immediately after our departure from Kentucky. Jennifer started calling within hours of our arrival back in Atlanta, demanding that I reconsider cutting off Samantha's college fund over what she called boyfriend drama. When I stopped answering her calls because I had nothing more to say to her, she began showing up at my house unannounced with increasing frequency. They didn't just show up once or twice. This became a regular pattern of harassment. First, it was Jennifer and Samantha together. Then eventually, the whole extended family clan got involved in what became a coordinated pressure campaign designed to wear down my resistance. Jennifer didn't come to my house to have a reasonable conversation or discussion. She came to deliver a lecture like she was some kind of authority figure in my life. She marched into my house like she was the one paying the mortgage, dropped her purse on the kitchen counter like she owned the place, and launched straight into her prepared speech. She was talking loud enough for the neighbors to hear every word, which I'm sure was intentional. You're really going to torch my daughter's future because she's dating someone you don't like? Are you even listening to yourself right now? She's worked for this opportunity her whole life. Top grades throughout high school, multiple scholarships, volunteer work at the hospital. You promised you'd help her with medical school, and now you're pulling that support just because of your personal issues with her boyfriend. That's completely insane behavior, David. I didn't say a single word during her entire rant, which she apparently took as permission to continue escalating her attack on my character and decision-making. She had obviously rehearsed this speech and was determined to deliver every line regardless of my response or lack thereof. Blake was a dumb teenager making poor decisions, just like Tyler was a victim of teenage bullying. But you're acting like Blake is the Antichrist incarnate. Meanwhile, your son is at Emory University with a full academic scholarship, and he's thriving in every aspect of his life. Maybe it's time you admit that Blake actually did Tyler a favor by making him stronger and more resilient than he would have been otherwise. That's when I stepped in close to her, maintaining a calm voice but making my position absolutely clear. You think Tyler's success came from being systematically tortured by a sociopath? He didn't thrive because of Blake Henderson. He survived in spite of what that monster did to him. Your daughter isn't being punished for dating the wrong guy. She's being cut off for bringing a known predator to my doorstep and calling it love. So don't you dare stand in my house and talk to me like I'm the problem here. Jennifer looked like she'd been physically slapped across the face. She was clearly not expecting me to defend my position so directly or to challenge her narrative about Blake's character reformation. Consider this your final courtesy visit, I told her firmly. Next time, don't bother walking in here like you're still family, because that relationship ended the moment you chose to support Tyler's tormentor over Tyler himself. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of my house without another word. Didn't even bother to close the front door behind her in her rush to leave. But you'd think that would have been the end of their harassment campaign, right? Unfortunately, it wasn't even close to being over. Samantha went full social media psychopath during these surprise family visits, launching a comprehensive online campaign designed to pressure me into restoring her college funding. She posted Instagram stories about her supposedly abusive uncle, who was punishing her for her boyfriend's childhood mistakes that happened years ago. She created multiple TikToks about toxic family members who destroy young people's futures over petty grudges from literal middle school drama. She even started a GoFundMe campaign for her medical school tuition, complete with a sob story about family abandonment and financial abuse by relatives who had promised to support her education. The campaign included photographs of Tyler from when he was younger, calling him my cousin who can't forgive or forget normal teenage interactions, and suggesting his facial differences made him overly sensitive to typical social challenges that other kids handle without trauma. My parents were even worse than Samantha's social media manipulation campaign, if you can believe that's possible. My mother kept calling Tyler's medical condition a blessing in disguise that should have made him stronger and more resilient to normal social challenges that all teenagers face. My father went even further with his victim-blaming approach, suggesting that maybe Tyler needed to learn how to be a real man instead of hiding behind his facial differences and past trauma like some kind of excuse. "You're coddling that boy, David," my dad said during one particularly heated phone call that lasted over an hour. "Real men don't hold grudges over childhood nonsense that happened years ago. Maybe if Tyler had acted more normal, kids wouldn't have picked on him in the first place. You can't expect other children to pretend everything's fine when it clearly isn't. Blake even showed up to one of these family intervention sessions, playing the reformed bad boy angle with an Academy Award-worthy performance that would have impressed professional actors. He delivered lots of generic statements about how I was just a kid back then and I've learned so much about empathy and personal growth since those middle school days. But notice how he never actually apologized for anything specific that he'd done to Tyler. It was just carefully crafted remorse theater designed to manipulate my family into pressuring me to restore Samantha's college fund and forgive past mistakes for the sake of family unity. The final straw that broke my patience completely came when Jennifer and Samantha decided to ambush Tyler at his summer internship in Atlanta. Tyler works at a logistics software company downtown, and they cornered him in the employee parking lot after his shift ended for the day. Samantha was filming everything with her phone for social media documentation, treating my son's trauma like content for her online harassment campaign. Jennifer demanded that Tyler tell his father to stop being vindictive and selfish, and to think about Samantha's future instead of dwelling on ancient history that didn't matter anymore. When Tyler tried to leave the parking lot and get to his car, Samantha physically blocked his path while continuing to record everything. She kept asking him why he couldn't forgive and forget like a mature adult, and whether he actually enjoyed destroying other people's dreams out of spite and selfishness. Tyler had a full panic attack right there in front of his coworkers who were leaving work at the same time. It was a complete meltdown, hyperventilating, shaking, the whole trauma response that he'd worked years to overcome through therapy. His supervisor had to call paramedics because they thought Tyler was having a cardiac event and might need emergency medical attention. That's when I stopped playing defense and went completely scorched earth on everyone involved. First move was filing comprehensive restraining orders against Jennifer, Samantha, my parents, and my brother Danny through my attorney. I had my lawyer send cease and desist letters to anyone who'd been harassing us online or ambushing Tyler in person, making it clear that continued contact would result in legal consequences. But the restraining orders were just the opening move in a much larger strategic operation that I'd been planning since discovering Blake's criminal activities. Time to introduce Blake Henderson to the concept of real consequences for his actions. The thing about working in defense logistics for over a decade is that you develop certain operational capabilities that most people don't possess. When you're moving sensitive materials worth millions of dollars, you don't think emotionally or make impulsive decisions based on anger. You build systematic processes, follow established threat assessment protocols, and execute operations with surgical precision. I spent 3 weeks compiling a comprehensive intelligence package on Blake Henderson's criminal activities, treating it like any other high-stakes business operation. The package included detailed financial records, social media screenshots with timestamps, witness statements from multiple sources, roommate complaints with supporting documentation, and every scrap of incriminating evidence that my investigator had managed to dig up. I also used some internal tools that we employ for security screening of personnel who handle classified materials. Let's just say that when you have the right resources and connections, you can compile more than enough evidence to destroy someone's future. Then I launched the operation with the same methodical approach I use for business contracts. I created multiple anonymous email accounts and properly anonymized them using techniques I'd learned through my security clearance work. Each account delivered a different piece of the puzzle to Georgia Tech Administration, campus police, the local district attorney's office, and the DEA's regional task force. Different tips from different sources, but all targeting the same individual, Blake Henderson. I want to be absolutely clear about something important here. I didn't fabricate any evidence or embellish any facts. I simply presented the uncut truth about Blake's criminal activities in a way that no one could ignore or sweep under the rug. Everything I sent was completely factual and verifiable through official channels. But I wasn't finished with just the local authorities. I sent a comprehensive copy to the Georgia State Medical Board with a polite heads up that one of their future applicants had a documented fondness for controlled substances and intimidation tactics. I forwarded a detailed financial breakdown to the IRS highlighting Blake's substantial unreported income from his pharmaceutical side business. And I sent the entire package, gift-wrapped with a bow, to an investigative reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution who'd recently done an expose piece on drug rings operating within college Greek life organizations. Then, I made one quiet phone call to my old military buddy Jake Morrison, who's now a detective with Atlanta Police Department. I simply mentioned that this particular kid might have deeper family connections worth investigating, given the sophisticated nature of his operations. Jake just said, "Funny timing. We've had a few things pop up about Georgia Tech lately. I'll take a closer look at this situation." The dominoes fell faster than I could have hoped for in my wildest dreams. Within 72 hours, campus police conducted a raid on Blake's dorm room based on anonymous tips and ongoing investigations. They found substantial quantities of Adderall, Xanax, OxyContin, professional packaging supplies, detailed transaction logs, and enough controlled substances to start a mini-pharmacy. Blake got expelled from Georgia Tech on the spot, not suspended pending investigation, but permanently banned from campus. Federal agents were immediately notified because it turns out that selling Schedule II narcotics to rich college kids isn't protected by Daddy's expensive legal team, no matter how much money and influence the family thinks they have. The local district attorney charged Blake with felony distribution of controlled substances, which carries serious prison time in Georgia. Witnesses immediately came forward, including his old roommate Brandon, who had been keeping meticulous records of Blake's criminal enterprise. The kid had receipts for everything, literally transaction logs, photographs, recorded conversations, financial records. Brandon had been documenting everything as insurance in case Blake tried to frame him for the operation. Even better for the prosecution, the financial investigation revealed a clear trail that led straight to Blake's unexplained income streams. Venmo transaction logs, ATM deposits that didn't match his bookstore salary, cash payments recorded by multiple witnesses. All of it painting a crystal clear picture of a sophisticated drug operation. Blake had been running a pharmaceutical distribution business on campus and hiding the profits in plain sight, thinking his family's wealth made him untouchable. But the investigation didn't stop there, because Jake's team decided to open a separate inquiry into Robert Henderson's real estate empire. Some of those property deals looked suspiciously clean for such large transactions. Cash purchases with no actual tenants, rental income that didn't line up with market rates, mysterious LLCs that existed only on paper. It was enough evidence for the IRS to start digging through years of tax filings, and the federal agents absolutely love it when white-collar crime drops directly into their lap with a bow on top. Meanwhile, Patricia Henderson got put on indefinite leave from her prestigious law firm. Apparently, you can't represent Fortune 500 clients while your son's mugshot is trending on local news and your husband's business empire is under federal audit for potential money laundering. The partners decided that the Henderson family had become too much of a liability for their corporate image. Jennifer and Samantha completely imploded when they realized what was happening. They accused me of overreacting to teenage drama, destroying innocent lives over ancient grudges, and going nuclear over middle school bullying that should have been forgotten years ago. Samantha posted another sob story on social media about how I had weaponized my military PTSD against an innocent college student who'd made mistakes as a child. She even had the audacity to accuse Tyler of manipulating me into this campaign of revenge, suggesting that he was somehow the real villain in this situation. But the facts spoke for themselves, and the evidence was overwhelming. I didn't fabricate anything, I didn't hack into any systems illegally, and I didn't even make direct threats against anyone. I simply connected the dots between Blake's criminal activities and handed that information to people who get paid by taxpayers to act when crimes are brought to their attention. Everything that happened to Blake was the natural consequence of his own criminal behavior, not some elaborate revenge scheme. Then came the restraining order hearing, which turned into a complete circus. Jennifer brought expensive lawyers who tried to paint me as an unstable veteran with anger management issues. Samantha cried dramatically in court, performing for the judge like she was auditioning for a soap opera. My parents actually tried to testify that I had always been vengeful and prone to holding grudges, and one of them even called me mentally unstable due to my military service. It was actually pretty entertaining to watch their desperation. My attorney calmly dropped exhibit after exhibit on the judge's desk. The original videos from Blake's middle school assault on Tyler, documentation of the panic attack Tyler suffered at his internship after their parking lot ambush, the police reports from Blake's criminal charges, and medical statements showing Tyler's renewed trauma response from the family harassment campaign. My attorney closed his presentation with a simple, devastating statement. "Your Honor, this isn't a grudge or revenge fantasy. This is a father using completely legal channels to protect his son from continued harassment by people who've shown absolutely no remorse for their behavior and whose actions keep escalating despite multiple warnings. The evidence shows a clear pattern of predatory behavior that spans from middle school through college, with no signs of reform or accountability. The judge didn't hesitate for even a moment. He issued comprehensive 4-year no-contact restraining orders for Jennifer, Samantha, my parents, and Blake Henderson himself. The orders were ironclad: no physical contact, no phone calls, no social media interaction, no third-party communication through other family members. Violation of any aspect of the restraining orders would result in immediate arrest and criminal charges. Done deal. Blake eventually pled guilty to reduced charges to avoid federal prosecution and serious prison time. He received 20 months of supervised probation, 600 hours of community service, mandatory psychological evaluation and treatment, and a permanent criminal record that would follow him forever. His carefully planned future in medical school was completely destroyed. His name became toxic in academic circles, and his reputation was permanently ruined. Robert Henderson's company lost 3 major commercial contracts within weeks as news of the investigation spread through business networks. The company is still under active federal investigation for money laundering and tax evasion, with more charges likely coming down the pipeline. The local newspaper ran the story on the front page under the headline, "Prominent Developer's Son Expelled, Charged in College Drug Scandal," which pretty much destroyed the family's social standing in their community. Samantha ended up dropping out of her pre-med program entirely because the stress and financial pressure became too overwhelming. Her GoFundMe campaign was flagged for fraud after someone submitted an anonymous tip about misuse of Tyler's photographs and false claims about family abuse. Now she's attending community college part-time while working retail, and she's still blaming everyone except herself for her situation. Jennifer hasn't spoken to me since the restraining order hearing, which is honestly the best outcome I could have hoped for. My parents are still theoretically concerned about family unity, but they haven't called or attempted contact since my lawyer's cease and desist letter arrived via certified mail. The message was apparently clear enough even for them to understand. And what about Tyler through all of this chaos? He's absolutely thriving in ways that exceed every expectation we had for his recovery. He's currently in his junior year at Emory University, maintaining excellent grades while his consulting business continues expanding with new clients who value his technical expertise. He's even dating a girl who thinks his surgical scars make him look like a cyberpunk version of Bruce Wayne, which tells you everything you need to know about her character. Tyler still locks his bedroom door at night out of habit, and probably always will. But he's not afraid anymore of running into Blake or dealing with harassment from my family. Most importantly, Blake Henderson is no longer a shadow lurking in the background of his life, and Tyler knows that his father will go to any lengths necessary to protect him from predators. So go ahead and call me whatever names you want for systematically destroying my niece's boyfriend after he spent years tormenting my son. Call it revenge, call it overkill, call it whatever makes you feel better about the situation. I call it protection and justice with better logistics than most people have access to. You come for my family? You better be ready for the full weight of resources, connections, and operational capabilities that I've spent 20 years building through military service and business success. And if you're stupid enough to keep committing federal crimes while I'm actively watching and documenting your every move, well, that's just poor planning on your part. Some people call what I did revenge, but I call it justice with better logistics than most people have access to. Blake Henderson made the mistake of thinking that time had somehow erased his crimes, or that his family's wealth would protect him from consequences forever. He was wrong on both counts. The reality is that predators like Blake don't reform or develop empathy. They just get better at hiding their true nature from adults who might hold them accountable. His college behavior proved that he was the same sociopath who tortured my son in middle school, just operating with more sophisticated methods and better legal protection. The drug dealing, the psychological manipulation of vulnerable students, the threats against witnesses, it was all the same pattern, just scaled up for a college environment. My family chose to support a known predator over their own blood relative who had been victimized by that same predator. They demanded that Tyler get over systematic torture that had nearly driven him to suicide, while simultaneously defending the person who had caused that trauma. When they started harassing Tyler at his workplace and triggering panic attacks, they crossed a line that I couldn't allow them to cross. I used legal channels, factual evidence, and legitimate law enforcement contacts to expose ongoing criminal behavior. Everything that happened to Blake and his family was the direct result of their own choices and actions, not some elaborate revenge fantasy. The truth has a way of catching up with people eventually, especially when they're arrogant enough to think rules don't apply to them. Tyler is safe now. Blake's criminal enterprise has been shut down. And my family understands that there are consequences for supporting predators over victims. Sometimes the system works exactly like it's supposed to when you know how to navigate it properly. That's my story. Make of it what you will. Edit. A lot of people are asking in the comments whether I think I went too far or if I have any regrets. The answer is simple. I regret not doing this sooner. If I had properly investigated Blake's activities years earlier, I might have prevented him from destroying other students' lives in college. My only regret is that it took a family gathering for me to realize he was still actively hurting people. Edit 2. For those asking about Tyler's current situation, he's doing amazing. His consulting business just landed a major contract with a Fortune 500 company. He's considering graduate school, and he's genuinely happy for the first time since middle school. That's worth more than any family relationship that required me to tolerate his abuser.